Welcome to the Resonate Church Missoula podcast. This podcast exists to equip and encourage the members of Resonate Church to get the gospel to people, people to community, and community to mission. Thanks for listening. Well, what's up, Resonate? Welcome to this special episode of the Resonate Missoula podcast. This episode is a recording of a recent Resonate Network pastors meeting that featured guest Joe Rigney. Joe is a theologian. He's a pastor, he's an author, speaker, husband, father. I've read almost all of Joe's books. I've taken our staff through some of his work before, and it's been a tremendous blessing to me and to us. And so I was really thankful for the opportunity to be on a call with Joe recently, and I wanted to share it with you guys. In this meeting, Joe talks about what it looks like to be churches marked by corporate Christian masculine agency. Those are his 4 words: corporate Christian masculine agency. He talks about what it is, why it's important, and how to cultivate it in our churches. So I hope you enjoy.
Thanks again, Joe, for being here. I really appreciate you. Some of our pastors are out on vacation, so we have some guys here, and I've been wanting to have this kind of conversation. But if you guys don't know Joe, Joe's a theologian, a pastor, an author. He's helped Christians shape what we think deeply about joy, holiness, courage, imagination, leadership, faithfulness. And currently he leads the MDiv program at New St. Andrews, and previously served as president professor of Bethlehem College and Seminary and pastor of Cities Church, as we've been talking about, as a teacher of design God. And so I wanted Joe to spend time with us because I think he is especially relevant to help us to understand how pastors that are leading college students and young adults help us think about enjoying God's world without idolizing it, how to lead courageously without being harsh, how to care for God's people while being ruled by anxiety, and how to cultivate the kind of inner life that can sustain the long-term in ministry. And more than that, man, I met Joe on a bench watching our kids play ball, and we just started talking, and Joe grew up really close to where my grandparents lived in West Texas, went to Texas A&M, and so has been in SBC world for a while before he got to Moscow. And so there's a lot of intertwining realities. And then more than anything, I just have appreciated watching Joe be a dad and be a baseball dad. And his son Peter is one of my favorite kids. I tell my son Carter, hey, watch what Peter does. Watch how he leads, and that's about the biggest compliment I can give you, Joe, is to be able to see how great your kids are. And watching you as a dad has been really, really fun, and being able to be on the sidelines rooting for him has been a joy. So anyway, I wanted to just ask you if you had 1 hour with these guys who are church planting pastors on a college campus, what would you want to start? What would you want to talk about? So I gave you some prompts, but you can just go wherever.
That's great. So I thought about that because, you sent me all those prompts and I was like, oh man, there's a lot of good stuff. Obviously I've written books about most of these things. This is awesome. I will talk about all of these. So feel free once we open it up to go wherever. When I thought about what would I say to guys, in that kind of ministry and, kind of in like I'm
recording in progress.
I'm very familiar with your world, I guess, in the sense of like I grew up in it. Like I was involved in college ministry at Texas A&M, big college town, Christian college town, puts out more missionaries than any other university. At least it did when I was there. Big SBC, was in SBC most of my life, other than the stint with Bethlehem, and it might as well have been because theologically it was all there. So very much get kind of like your world, even though I'm not currently in it. I'm, Presbyterian, Paedo-Baptist, covenantal, all that kind of stuff. So when I thought about what would I want to say is 4 words: corporate Christian masculine agency. Okay, corporate Christian masculine agency. And this is an idea. I wrote an article about this, which you can go track down, and I'll kind of give you the Cliff Notes version of it. But if you want to go kind of follow up on it, last year. And it was kind of piggybacking off a friend of mine who had written an engagement with John Mark Comer. You guys familiar with John Mark Comer, Ruthless Elimination of Hurry guy? And basically my friend Chase Davis he's now written a book kind of in the same vein called Offensive Christianity. It's on masculinity, and he was really taking Comer to task for a kind of more like therapeutic, and somewhat kind of like effeminizing approach to spirituality that kind of tried to avoid, yes, spiritual formation, but kind of in that therapeutic key. And so he was taking that and saying like this, it kind of tends to be passive rather than active. It tends to be more feminine rather than masculine. It results in some theological shifts. So Comer kind of has like migrated on like penal substitution. Is that really the way the Bible talks? And so discomfort with the wrath of God. And you can kind of see back in sort of when I was coming through early ministry, it was like the Rob Bell trajectory, where you kind of get really into this kind of therapeutic mode of thinking about God and sin is mainly brokenness and, how hurt people are, which of course is true, but it was like at the exclusion of sin is also rebellion and God is angry and wrath is real and hell is real. So you get kind of that, you can kind of see that slide. So that's what Chase was kind of going after him. And I thought what he said was all right. But the thing, so he was saying like, we need more, focus on like Comer's like, we can focus on the Bible, we can focus on spiritual disciplines, focus on these things, but it's very privatized and very soft. But as I thought about it, I thought, I think that criticism of Comer is valid, but I think that there's more to it, because when I think about my own theological journey kind of through, especially like Piper World. And John was a, key mentor. We lived with him for 4 years when we were my wife and I were first married, living in Minnesota. We lived in their basement and got, Sunday dinners and like lots of John's had a major impact on my life in so many ways. But he was always very comfortable with very masculine, like very like aggressive, like don't waste your life, spread a passion for God's supremacy, kill your sin. And so it was interesting as I was reading Chase's criticism of Comer to go like, yeah, Piper, I think would agree with a lot of this. And yet I still feel like there was something missing even from what we were doing at Bethlehem, and that I think we are doing here in Moscow. And that's what I'd want to commend. And the issue was corporate Christian masculine agency. So there's ways in which basically, so like kind of here's one of my kind of principles that I use as a filter on lots of issues is oftentimes the problem is not what's present, but what's absent. Okay. So frequently when you come up with when you're talking about is something healthy, is something good, it's not, and you say, oh, it's not good. It's not because necessarily there's something there that's wrong. That could be the case. But oftentimes the first step is actually there's something missing that ought to be there and nobody knows. And so you can have all of these really good things that are there, and you can go like, yeah, this is there. That's good. That's biblical. That's good. That's good. That's good. And you go, but there's something off that's kind of creates a vulnerability, creates opportunities for sabotage and steering, all that kind of stuff. And I would say that a resistance to corporate Christian masculine agency is a deficiency in a lot of evangelical circles. So what do I mean by that? I mean Christian men asserting themselves as men together for the good of their people, their community, the church, whatever, for the glory of God. And especially when it comes to corporate Christian masculine agency directed towards anything to do with this world, applying the Bible in anything to do with this world. And that's everything from like the Christian nationalism kind of discussion, whatever's going on with that, and whatever you think about that, that's what that's about, to your household. And one of the things that Pastor Wilson has often said is that one of the chief weaknesses of a lot of evangelical preaching and teaching, especially Reformed evangelical preaching and teaching, is an allergy to application. So it's all fine to talk about theology in the abstract, to talk about big doctrines, big God. But if you try to actually apply it and press it in and say, well, and what do we do? Here's what we believe. Okay, great. You got the statement of faith. It's all there. And it's important. what's missing? It's like, well, what are we supposed to do with it? Like, what do we actually do? And I would say that's a major weakness. And so if I'm talking to you guys, I would say don't be weak in that area. It would be one of the things you should be trying to cultivate among your college students is corporate Christian masculine agency. Christian men acting together as men, meaning including in ways that are kind of distinctively male or distinctively masculine. So there's ways that sometimes men do things together, but they can be very effeminized in the way that they do it. They adopt more feminine modes of speaking to each other, or feminine priorities come to dominate. And it's not wrong to have feminine influence. Like, that's healthy communities are going to have both men and women in them exerting influence. But if it's dominant, if feminine influences are dominant and masculine ways of being, for lack of a better word, are suppressed and resisted, you're going to have a long-term vulnerability, and it will drift, usually theologically liberal. This is where my sin of empathy stuff comes into play in that. And it will be softer, and it will be less able to guard boundaries, and it will, in the long run, be bad for everybody. I think that Western civilization as a whole is living through this. So anyway, that's the idea. So if the idea would be a vision for corporate Christian masculine agency, or corporate Christian agency with a masculine feel, flavor, key, and directed to applying the scriptures to life in this world. If you do that, I think that's going to be to your benefit, but you will also probably in some places find that you will be kneecapped. There will be people who will say, well, no, we don't do that. That's not what we do around here. And those I call them kneecaps. It's basically, it's like the, I don't know if you guys are old enough, but like Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, Keith knows, he remembers. But like, right. So like somebody's going to take a big, tire iron to your knee so that you can't do what you're trying to do something, and they'll try to kneecap you. And that's where there's certain kinds of like, there's a therapeutic kneecap of like, hey, exercising power in this way, exercising agency, doing things is not the way of Jesus. Jesus is, gentle, meek, mild, and passive. That's the caricature. Or my kingdom's not of this world. You're focusing too much on the things of this world. And so there's a pietistic kind of kneecap there. You could have what you're talking about sounds very scary. That's a kind of feminized kneecap, right? Because it sounds scary. Is it true? It doesn't matter if it sounds scary. It's true. And then you have all of these kind of like ways that you can be undercut in your effort to do things. And I would just encourage you, don't like do them anyway. Like have an attitude that like, yeah, but we're gonna anyway. And don't allow those various efforts to sabotage or steer dissuade you from saying, no, we're going to apply the Bible to every area of life. We're going to do things. We're going to encourage our men, like part of what your college students need. Yes, 100%. Saw that, Preston? That is exactly 100% right. You're just hurting your witness. Is exactly a good example of a kneecap. And so you just need to anticipate that, like that's what they're going to say. And if the criticism there, this is one of my kind of basic sabotage rules, is that people are always going to try to figure out what your steering wheel is. So I have this image in my head of like, you have a steering wheel on your back and people try to grab that to get you to go where they want you to go. And for a lot of people, steering wheels are labels. What can they call you to get you to, if they call you this thing, you will stop doing what they want you to stop doing. Okay. And that can vary depending on your community, who your evangelistic target is, all that kind of stuff. But you should do an assessment as a pastor and try to figure out like, what's the worst thing that someone could call me? Or if I gained a reputation as X, I would go to great lengths to try to prove it wrong. Okay. Once you've done that, you've figured out where your steering wheel is. And then if you figure out what do you do? Okay, I know where it is. There's my vulnerability is don't be steered by it, right? When somebody grabs for it. And my two rules here are you should be willing and even eager. Jesus says, rejoice when they say false things about you. So they're going to lie about you. And you should rejoice when they do. And you should make sure that the slanders are actually false. Like, so like before God, like don't become the evil thing that they think you are. Like you don't have to be the evil thing. There's a kind of a right-wing reactionary version, application of what I'm talking about that basically like leans into, well, they're going to call me a racist, so I'm actually going to become one. Or they're going to call me a misogynist, so I'm actually going to become one. They're going to call me an anti-Semite, so I'm going to become one. And so like they kind of, that's just another way of being steered. It's like they're going to call you the name and you think, well, if I'm going to be called it, if they're going to hang me as a thief, I might as well steal something. And what I'm saying is, no, be willing and rejoice when they call you the bad thing and make sure it's not true, right? Before God, make sure it's not true. And then don't let it dissuade you from doing the thing that God's called you to do. So maybe that's a good place. It's kind of like a beginning. Feel free to ask questions or follow up there. And I've got plenty more to say, but want to kind of go where you guys maybe helped.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Jonathan.
Hey, John.
Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you could give maybe a few examples of like Christian masculine corporate agents corporate Christian masculine
agency. Yeah. So a good example would be, the part of where I picked up on this is, so Keith mentioned, we're a big baseball family. So when I was in the Twin Cities, coached a lot of youth baseball. And one of the things that was really interesting to me about my experience there was watching as I was coaching with a lot of non-Christian dads, nominally Christian, some Catholic, but very, what you would think of in an urban center like Minneapolis, which is, if you guys are in any urban centers, you know what I mean. But these are sports dads. And it was interesting to see how much they threw themselves into coaching. And as I thought about it, what occurred to me was, I think that most of these guys live most of their lives in mixed gender spaces at their work, that are heavily HR'd, which means they're heavily governed by feminine social norms. And that basically coaching their sons in sports is like the last place that they're allowed to exert masculine tendencies without any interference. So, and again, don't hear what I'm not saying. Men and women should work together in all kinds of ways, right? Build households, build communities, all that kind of stuff. But our culture has kind of pathologized male spaces. Like anything, if men get together, and there's reasons for this, because when men get together, they tend to create power structures that become threats to other power structures. Like groups of men act. This is why we talk about female empowerment, because women tend to not create power structures. They need to be empowered by others. This is why women tend to, their ways of like enforcing social norms is often to like get authorities to do something about it. Whereas men, if left unchecked, like men will just do things. Right. So anyway, I just noticed that these guys would throw themselves into the sports. And I felt like it's because there's a good and right male desire to like work with other men, to build something, to do something, and to do it in ways that men respect. Like, so men talk to each other different than they talk to women, right? You argue with a guy differently than you would argue with a woman. The other place I noticed this was the tag team. We were planting City's Church. And I realized that like kind of even among Christians, church planting was actually kind of one of the last places where you could have, it was just guys. It was like five of us sitting around a living room table planning to plant this church. Like, were our wives involved and did they want this to happen? Sure. And did they come to a lot of the meetings? Did they make great input? Absolutely. But our elder meetings were just men. What are we going to do? And because of that, we would like spar with each other. Like guys would make arguments and guys would push back, and it would be very, and this is kind of, I always use this example. I remember early in my marriage, well, maybe not early, maybe it's probably five or more years in. We had some missionary friends who were really close with us when we were in Minneapolis. They'd gone into the field. They came back and they were visiting us. And in our house at the time, we had our kitchen, and off our kitchen was a sunroom. So I was in the sunroom with my friend Alex, and my wife was in the kitchen with her friend Betsy. And all that separates us is it's soundproof, like the sliding door, but you could still see. And so Alex and I are out there talking and whatever, and Betsy and my wife are talking. Later that night, they're gone, and my wife and I are debriefing, and she was like, "What were you guys fighting about?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "What were you guys like? Were intense. Like, what were you fighting about?" I was like, "Well, we talked about his dissertation. He's working on a dissertation, and I was disagreeing with him. We weren't fighting." She's like, "If I spoke to Betsy the way you guys were speaking to each other, we would no longer be friends." And I was like, for me, it was like, this was great. Like, we had a great time. Like, I was pushing on him and he was pushing back, and it was very animated and we were very lively. And for us, it was like, this was the substance of the friendship. It was like, we argue about theology. And for her, it was like, if I ever spoke that way, we would not be friends anymore. So men speak, and the same thing proved true in our church planting. You guys have probably experienced this with if you've got a team of guys as you're trying to do it. Somebody proposes tonight, "Hey, should we do this? Like this Sunday, should we do this thing or that thing?" And somebody's like, "I think it's a dumb idea." And you'll say that, "I think it's a dumb idea." And then they'll go, "Well, no, it's not. Like, this is what," and you spar, like men talk to each other different, and they talk to each other different when it's just men versus when women are present. So even if it's still just the guys making decisions, but women are present, like if you're doing it, you're going to soften the way you speak. So part of what I'm trying to get at is there's a certain energy, ambition, power creation that happens when men act in concert as men. And so in the baseball and in the church planting, that was like, I was like, hey, like part of why this is energizing is that for a minute we can just be dudes and godly dudes. It was like part of the thing that I noticed in those dynamics was if when it was just the guys in the church plant, we would argue with each other as a way of pressure testing the other guy's backbone. Does that make sense? Like part of what men do, this is why men spar and joke with each other in the way that we do. Like we make fun of each other to see, like, are you a dude I can rely on, or do you fold like a cheap suit, get defensive, get snippy? If you get made fun of, do you wilt, or do you bow up and get real blustery? Because it's a way that men determine, like, are you reliable? Like, can I like, are you a dude that I can rely on? Or when the pressure comes, are you going to be a flake, or are you going to blow up and lose your cool and I can't rely on you? So I think that's part of how men learn that. We spar verbally. When kids are little, we physically, probably if you got college students, they're doing this. Your college guys are doing this all the time with each other. Even to the point of like wrestling with each other, right? Like I remember, it's like, what is it doing? It's testing the strength of my people to see whether or not you're reliable. Okay. So I think that in modern culture in general, like our social system wants to quarantine that, and it wants to quarantine it in youth sports, where it kind of can be safely vented without harm to anybody. And then in the church, it's like the kind of church planting, honestly, is like the last place where kind of that's allowed. And even there, you'll have certain kind of pressure. I don't know how Resonate works or whatever, if these are kind of pressures, but like I know certain seasons at Bethlehem, there was pressures of like, we need to get more women in the room. And it would always, this is like PCA's dealing with this with their functional female officers who aren't officers. SBC deals with this with all of the, women pastors kind of stuff. But like the pressure of like women feel excluded if it's just the guys making decisions. And so you get that pressured. And I think it's a pressure that needs to be resisted in those contexts. And so back to your question, like, what would it mean? I think that kind of corporate Christian masculine agency needs to be encouraged beyond simply church planting and youth sports. So in our community, it means guys, start businesses together. And it doesn't mean that they don't eventually have women involved in various kind of ways. Again, you build households, you build lives together, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of times it's like the men, hey, what do we want to build? Because masculinity is the sort of thing that emerges through shared mission. It's not something that you get by aiming at it directly. Like I've written books on it. I've written things about masculinity. But if you actually want to see it happen, you actually need to just point at a hill and say, hey, we have to take that hill. Men, let's go take the hill. And if you go take the hill, masculine characteristics just show up: courage and fortitude and wisdom and excellence and skill and honor, and all of these kind of masculine traits just kind of start to pop out because we have to take the hill. Same thing happens. I coach football for Logos, and we talk to our boys about this a lot. Like, you have a mission: dominate the opponent, win the game. But it's because we want to train certain kind of masculine virtues. We want them to emerge through the shared mission. And so I would be looking for ways and encouraging and channeling that kind of energy among your college students, among your church, so that when they get big dreams and ambitions, you're not the guy who's like, well, I don't know, but you're the guy who's like, that sounds amazing. You should 100% do this. So I'll give you another. This is another example of kind of a kneecap thing. So I in another life, I might have been interested, like I might have done politics. I like it. I'm interested in it. I follow it the way that some people follow their favorite sports teams. I just kind of, I like the horse race. I like all that kind of stuff. So in the last election, one of the reasons that Trump won is because of this guy named Scott Presler. Does anybody know who Scott Presler is? Okay, so Scott Presler, he's a homosexual single guy. I guess he's not married, gay married, but like he's gay. And basically what he did is he camped out in Pennsylvania for like 6 months or more, registering the Amish to vote. It's the weirdest thing in the entire world, honestly. Like, it's a gay dude, very big Trump supporter, who realized, like, if we're going to win Pennsylvania, we need to get the Amish in the game. And so he would like go to these like farmers markets and other events, and his whole goal was register the Amish to vote. Because he was like, if the Amish vote in Pennsylvania, they're going to vote for Trump. If they vote for Trump, we win Pennsylvania. We win. Okay. I think it's hilarious, honestly, that the Lord, like, that the story he wrote was like, gay dude's going to get the Amish to vote for Trump. Like, I think that's just a funny story that God told. But one of the things that I thought about is if an evangelical kid came to, like a college student, his age, came to a pastor and said, hey, I really care about the direction of our country. And I really feel like this is what needs to happen. And so for the next 6 months, I'm going to move to Pennsylvania or Michigan, and I'm going to register people to vote so that they can vote for this party. I think 75 to 80% of conservative evangelical pastors would try to discourage him. And they would say, I don't know if that's a good use of your time. And those kneecaps would come out. Okay. The kneecaps would come out. And they would be from people who would say, should we care about the public square? Yes. Like, we should care. Christians should want to have influence in the public square. It's not like the folks who would be like anti any political engagement. It would be like, is that really a good ambition? And I think that they would be kneecapped. So I'm like, that's why he's doing it. And it's not an evangelical kid. I think the flip side of that would be someone like Charlie Kirk, who basically just did stuff and decided, I'm going to start organizations and I'm going to start to build this thing and I'm going to do all of these things. And I think had he been in the wrong church context, or had he listened to the wrong church context, he would have been kneecapped. Hey, what is this going to do to your witness? Is this really what God wants us to be doing? And so masculine ambition would constantly be checked in things that would be, people would say, is this lawful according to the Bible? Yes. Like, nobody's going to, is it a sin to organize people to vote or whatever, or like start a political group on campus or whatever? Most Christians are going to be like, no, it's not wrong, but they're going to try to discourage it because corporate Christian masculine agency applied to this world is inherently suspect and therefore needs to be corralled, tamed, kneecapped. So if you think about the difference between if an evangelical kid came to you and was like, I really feel called for the next 6 months, I want to move to Malaysia and evangelize Muslims. Every evangelical pastor is going to be like, man, praise God. Praise God. Like, let's go. But if you came and said, hey, I want to move to Washington and get an internship to try to, and then you fill in the blank of whatever the political, could be, if it was, I would say this, if it was abortion, you might go, okay, that sounds okay. But say if it was something, say it was like immigration, it's like, I really want to go and try to, work at some place that's going to try to get a handle on this immigration thing. A lot of evangelical pastors are going to be like, I don't know, don't waste your life. That's an interesting thing. Why is it? Well, it's because it's applying it to things in this world, whereas the missions thing is very clearly spiritual, godly, whatever. But it's like, well, is immigration enforcement loving my neighbor? Like, is there a love for neighbor that's involved in that? And I think yes. Okay, so he's trying to love his neighbor. Why would you discourage him? And so I think that those are the kinds of things. So starting businesses, being engaged in whether it's political or cultural, war, culture engagement, whatever you want to call it, conflicts, those would be places where I think you're going to get pushed back, kneecapped in the wrong places because your emphasis is wrong or you've got your priorities out of whack. As opposed to saying all of Christ for all of life. Apply the Bible, apply it everywhere you go.
Hey, Joe, is there a guardrail on the other side of that? As we think about, trying to figure out how do we move that?
Yeah.
Anything that you give us in terms of wisdom on being able to say, hey, that's too far. This is where you're going to fall into a trap where people can point and they're actually legit in that criticism.
Yeah, sure. And I think it would be, so again, go back to the idea of the problem is not what's present, it's what's absent. Okay, so if you neglected Bible reading, prayer, worship, if you neglected your family, right? In other words, there's these other responsibilities. If those are being neglected for the cause, and fill in the blank on what the cause is, right? Then I would say something's amiss. Okay, but it would only be that. So if I had somebody who came and said, man, I'm really passionate, young guy or whatever. We got some friends who are really involved in this weather stuff, like Rainmaker. I don't know if you guys are familiar with these guys. They're like a cloud seeding. So it's like Salt Lake City is a big one because they're trying to refill the Great Salt Lake because the water levels are going down. They're like, we need more snowpack. We need things like that. And I'm like, if someone's like, that's my ambition, I want to go work with them and try to do that. A lot of guys are going to go like, yeah, does that really matter? Or like it's going to be a very spiritualized thing. And it's like, I want you to go whole hog, provided, do you love God? Are you worshiping with God's people? Are you in the Word? Are you praying? If you're married, are you tending to your wife? Are you raising your kids in the Christian faith? Like, are all of those things present? And if they are, then man, go for it. And so those would be the kinds of tests, more so than whether I think the amount of time they spend on their vocation or calling is a certain level. Does that make sense? So again, I'm going to be looking for what's missing. I know that like one of the criticisms that Moscow's always got is like, oh, Doug's always doing culture war stuff, and it's like 85% of what Doug does is like just basic Bible teaching at this church. Like it's just normal sermons on the Book of Esther or the Book of Acts. And it's applying the Bible to your home and your family and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, does he do cultural commentary? But it's like the criticism assumes that's all we do, when it's like I can show you like there's prayer meetings, there's all these other kind of things that are happening constantly. Psalm sings, outreach, evangelism on U of I campus, all this kind of stuff. It's like it's all happening. It just doesn't get the headlines that a blog post that he does gets. And so but people judge by that rather than by actual like the totality. So that's how I would be measuring is be faithful with what is your first calling, which would be personal before God, family, and then out of that, man, I don't want to kneecap people.
That's really helpful, Joe. Good to see you. Glad to have you here on the meeting. Yeah. I have a question for you. So throughout most of Resonate's history, we saw a demographic lean toward females. We were probably 60-40 young women for most of Resonate's history, or somewhere in there. And then interestingly, in just the last couple of years, quite a few of our churches have seen a lean back the other way, even to the point where some of our churches are like 70-30 men. It's becoming a problem in some of our churches. So I want to I'm trying to pull something out of you that I've heard you talk about, and I've read you talk about before, to explain some of that. You talk about corporate Christian masculine agency. Could you speak to the connection between the individualization of the faith, kind of a John Mark Comer individualism, and how that feminizes the faith? So when the bride of Christ goes from a corporate reality to an individual reality, what does that do to the masculine feminine feel of the room?
100%.
And then probably we would say that's what caused the huge feminization of the church in the last decades. And then what should we do now that we're swinging back the other way? How do we prevent that from happening again?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I do think, there's mistakes that get made when people take, corporate biblical categories, church's bride, and they individualize it, and they emphasize that, and they can emphasize it in the preaching or in the singing. So the Jesus is my boyfriend, the Jesus is my boyfriend kind of songs or whatever would be another kind of way. And I think so whenever I'm traveling with like if my boys are at a baseball tournament and we go to church someplace, we will end up if there's no CRAC church, we just end up what's the local evangelical? We go to Baptist church or a EV Free church or something. And it's been interesting to go. These are often small towns or smallish towns, and to go and feel like the disconnect between the preaching and the music is pretty stark to me. I don't know that I would have felt it as strongly 10 years ago because it's a lot of the same songs that I would have been singing 10 years ago. But it's interesting how easily singable and expressive they are in a feminine mode, and how anemic or almost unnatural it feels, I think, for guys. And some of that's lyrical, and some of that's just the kind of music, or they've got, this is like some of the churches that we've ended up at have been like this. You can see the feminist pressure build because they tend to be churches that maybe have a male only eldership. The pressure to get women up front is very strong, and you can tell, because that's what matters. It's like we need to have more women represented up front in the worship team, because that's kind of like the only public thing that they can do or something. And so it's like, and my boys think it's funny sometimes because they go and it's like very clearly like they've got one guy and like 6 women in the worship team. And it's a very kind of like, it looks very odd. And then the song choices will tend to be songs that women really gravitate toward. Like the lyrics and the mode are very much the kind of like, I'll close my eyes and kind of like sway kind of stuff. And again, I'm not necessarily making comments about, like, I know guys do that too. But it's interesting to contrast like songs that if you've ever been with a group of men and you've been like, hey, let's pick a song that we're all really going to sing. And you've heard like men sing for real. And to be like, why doesn't that happen more often? Right. Like I would just say, if you don't know what I'm talking about, at your church in the next couple of weeks, sing A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. Okay. And just watch the dudes, just pay attention to it. Like watch how the men engage with a song like that. It's more martial. It calls out and like they will sing in a different kind of way than they will the others. And I don't think it's a defect necessarily in them. Sometimes it could be. Sometimes it could be just, I don't want to be expressive and I'm too, whatever. And there's a cultural thing there, whatever. But a lot of times it's just like the song's too high. Like we went to a church and it was like the singing was led by women and they were singing in soprano. And it was like, we couldn't sing it. So we're not going to sing it. We're just going to stand there. And it's like, so one of the things I would say is like the worship style that you choose, the song choices that you make, who sings them and how will affect like whether men really feel like this is mine and I'm participating, or whether I'm kind of like on the margins. It's one of the reasons, I don't know if you've ever noticed this in evangelical churches, when men, they may love the church because they love the teaching and they feel like there's a lot of good stuff going on, but they'll kind of gravitate and stay out of the corporate worship stuff and be more like, I'll work in the parking lot. Like I'll help direct traffic in the parking lot. And it's because they feel like I can be like, it's like every dad is like, yeah, I'll tell people where to go. Like, like I'll just like, I'll get, like there's certain roles that they'll gravitate toward, which isn't bad, but it's like some of it is, that's the only, like, that's a place where they can feel like they can be a man. So I would just say those would be some certain ways that I think the church lends itself to feminization. Now, if you guys are in a situation where you've tipped back, you've got a lot more guys showing up, I would say just be very encouraged by that. Like I would not see that first as a problem. Now, you start to get 70-30, 80-20, and you start to feel like, hey, these guys are gonna need wives. So we got like that's a hack that you've got to figure out. But the common way of like, what can we do to appeal more to women, I think would be a trap to fall back into, because generally speaking, like this isn't an absolute statement, like American culture is going through this big time right now, with like single women kind of steering hard left in every respect, and which is going to be a bigger cultural problem in the long run, I think. But in the church, I think if you have godly women, then they will follow men who are going somewhere. So if you cast vision for the guys to be like, hey, be a dude, take responsibility for yourself, love God, and start to build something, then it's like women will go like, yes, I want that. Like they will come looking for that. Because they'll feel safe, they'll feel protected, they'll feel like here are men who are going to take responsibility. They're not going to blame shift. They're not going to abdicate. They're going to get it done. And I would say that would be if a lot of times church life is just pick your problem, right? It's like, well, we could have this problem, we could have that problem. And it's like, I would 100% choose the problem of a bunch of, young, ambitious guys who are hungry versus a church of 70% women where we can't figure out how to even get guys to show up. It's interesting, the great article on this kind of stuff. It's about married culture. It's called The Great Feminization Thesis, by Helen Andrews, I think was her name. It came out a couple months ago. And basically part of what her argument was that what we called wokeness, at some level was basically feminine social norms applied to society. So cancel culture, ostracism, prioritizing people's feelings over what's true, all of that kind of stuff, which was at the core of wokeness, was basically, that's like how feminine. And so she said that what happened was the key things was when a given industry, a given field, a given, whether it was like business or medical profession or whatever, when it reached a tipping point where it was like 50% or more women, it was like you saw this cascade effect where all of a sudden the norms, like originally all of those industries were normed masculine. Like women had to break the glass ceiling or whatever to get in. And even for a while after, it was still like they were running on the fumes of previous, like men had built it. And then at some point, then it gets derailed because now it's not about can we make the best product, but it's like, are we socially signaling that we're the right kind of people? Like, are we communicating that we're good people by the causes that we celebrate and the Black Lives Matter and the rainbow flag and all these kind of things? And it was like that. So is it about making the best beer? Like, so like if you think about like Bud Light and their trajectory, where it was basically like, hey, we're like the light beer that you drink at a football game. And then they're like, all of a sudden, tipping point, and then they put women in charge of some of these things. And like, we're going to be the trans beer. We're going to have a trans spokesman. And it tanked them. Like they were like, we're done with Bud Light. And then thankfully, they realized it, like this is going to torch our business. And the very next Super Bowl, they're like, hey, let's get Peyton Manning and Post Malone and Shane Gillis drinking beer in a backyard. And it was like, what was that? And it was like a recognition of like, we lost sight of like who our target audience was, our market was, and we need to get back to that. So anyway, but the Great Feminization Thesis is a really interesting article about how those kind of things can kind of like seep into institutions. And I think the church was susceptible to that. I think there's a little bit of a backlash that I think we want to take advantage of.
got a couple more minutes. What questions do you guys have for Joe?
Hey, Joe, thanks for being on the call. It's
Yeah.
been a pleasure. To your point earlier, I'm thinking about how to provoke agency in the men that I lead.
Yeah.
And there's been lots of times where I think I've probably kneecapped some guys because I just don't value the decisions they're making and the kind of passion they have for them.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating to hear you talk about like what makes these are non-negotiables. You know, it's your vertical relationship with God. It's what God has given you to steward and lead in your household and things like that. Are there anything else you would say makes the list? Does that make sense? Before you just say, go all in with that sort of thing, apart from what you've listed?
Yeah, I would say, so when we think about cultural, building Christian culture, worship's the heartbeat. So we honor God in his presence weekly, and then ask him, bless everything else we do outside of here. But like, that's the heartbeat. It's pumping blood to the body. From there, then it would be household education. So in a family context, the Christian education, are you loving your wife, loving your kids? That's the first qualification. Like that's the fundamental qualification for ministry. If you can't manage your own household, how can you manage the household of God kind of principle? And I think that it's a requirement for leadership in the church. But I also think in general, it's a wisdom principle for leadership anywhere. Does that make sense? So like if a guy is like, I really want to do this thing, it's not church work, but it's like, I want to start this business or do this thing, but his home's a train wreck. I would be like, hey man, before you do this, let's make sure your own house is put in order. Like, let's get a job, provide. That's part of what your obligation, your family is. But before you really kind of like launch out into some grand plan, like, let's make sure that you're not going to burn the most important things and the responsibilities you have. So some of it, so I agree and have experienced like, young guys. I think maybe one thing would be is when you encounter young guys who are dumb, do you think, like Paul, like when Paul told Titus, the Cretans are liars, lazy beasts, gluttons, quoted the proverb, and then he was like, so go appoint some elders. Like he's like, yeah, boy, there's some rough stuff here, but there's potential. Like there's something to work with. And are you for the guys that are you trying to channel it versus trying to like suppress it? And I think that would be the difference. Like, can you actually say I've had even my own sons who've said, Dad, I really, if he's bucked against certain things, family standards or different things like that, he'll be like, is this wrong? And it's like in my head, and I'm sitting there going like, well, the way you're wanting to do it right now, yes, but no, the desire itself is good. Like I'm always trying to teach them like your desire for that thing is a good desire at its base. It's just being twisted. It's being diverted into a sinful path or a foolish path. And I want to affirm the goodness of that desire. And I want to say, point it at this. Let me help you point it at something, and then like be like pushing you to go. The other thing is, in general, one of the things Doug says around here a lot is we'd rather be saying whoa than giddy up when it comes to the guys. If you can pick your problem, I'd rather have a situation where we're trying to rein in or channel masculine ambition and energy in fruitful ways than bumps on a log that you're trying to like, drag into fruitfulness, because you can't drag it. You can't push them to do it. So instead, you have to actually, like, you want to have something to work with. And we see that on the football team a lot, where you have guys who are knuckleheads in a lot of ways, but they're energetic and they're hungry. So okay, we can work with that. If you have guys who just don't care, then I'm like, we don't need you here. Just don't even be on the team. Like you're going to the more likely thing is you're going to drag everybody else down than that you're. And so there's ways in which like, do you really want to be a part of this? And that's where like the, requiring them to take responsibility for themselves. Like, hey, y'all come, everybody can come, but if you come, it's going to be like, we're doing this, like we're going this way. That's what leadership is like, I know what the thing is for, and I know where it's supposed to go, and I'm going to get it there on God's power. Like, that's what we're doing. And then if you're not, if you're going to try to derail us, that's what sabotage is. It's the attempt to like get you off that mission. Then it's like, no, we're not going to put up with it. And we're going to say, no, you're not a part of this. And so those would be like, so when, in terms of guys, you're trying to gauge, is this foolishness that can be mature, you know, if he will listen to instruction, he can grow out of this, or is it more rebellion and sabotage, in which case you probably have to draw a firmer line and say, that's not how we do things.
Hey, Joe, I think one of the words that was fascinating to me, as you said, is just that corporate piece to it.
Yeah.
And I'd love just to hear you talk about the necessity of the corporate nature of this. And really, is there some things that you've seen practically to say, hey, this is how you build that sense of corporate?
Yeah. So from a pastoral side, I think, honestly, so there's the preaching. So part of the reason that like Piper had the impact he did, I think, was that he, at least in the areas that he wanted to have, impact, was always like calling people to something, right? Like, and it was big God, big mission, don't waste your life, spread of passion. And it was like, and for guys in my generation, it just like struck a chord where you're like, I want to go, let's go. And so you want to preach like that. You want the pulpit will steer the church. And so you want to preach in such a way that you're calling people to things. So that would be one. And then when they start to do them, this is one of the things about my experience at Bethlehem that was where these thoughts came from, is on the one hand, I felt a little bit of a inconsistency when, like, say, Piper would preach real big on like, we want Wilberforce, we loved Wilberforce. But it was like, if anybody showed up with a Wilberforce-like ambition, it was like, you're going to get kneecapped. You're going to get discouraged. And so a big thing is, don't let your sort of counseling personally jar with the call that you just said, do. You just put out a big call, and then the guy shows up and says, I want to go do, and you're like, wah, wah, wah. Right? Instead, you want to go like, all right, cool. Like let's go do it. Here's some counsel on how to do it. I think the other thing, one thing that we did, this is at Cities, is we had like, when we did our men's retreats, we tried to make them a little more action, or at least when I was there, I don't know how they do it now, but like we want them to be a little more action oriented, or like I remember one time I did a whole talk set on like, and it was basically on how the household had changed in the modern world, industrialization, like how it fragmented things, like how that had, contributed to the feminist stuff, how it contributed to family breakdown, all that kind of stuff. So kind of like diagnosed here's where we are, here's what a biblical household was, here's what the household has become. And then it was basically like, okay, now I'm not going to solve this problem for all of you. I can't. Right? Like this is not a pastor problem. I can diagnose it. I can tell you what the Bible says about it. But solving this problem is actually all of our responsibility. And so like some of this, and then like we gave time for the guys to like talk about it. Like, what should we do? Like what should we try to build together? So just kind of like putting the ball in their court so that they felt that like, okay, no one is coming. I guess like that's another way to get at like how part of the way you create those corporate contexts is like show the problem and then communicate like nobody else is going to fix this. You can't be looking, if you start looking around like, well, who's in charge around here? It's like nobody is, but God is, and it's you. You're now the guy. Like for wherever your church is, it's like no one else is going to fix this. You have to build the thing that you want to live in. And so put that burden. And then I think there's good books on stuff like Chris Wiley's work on the household is really, really good stuff. Man of the House, Household in the War for the Cosmos. He's got a couple of different books on productive households. And then, Doug's stuff on family and stuff like that. So those are the places I would be starting and directing guys to like build that. And then to do it, like, again, thinking of it as a together thing. Like even if we're not in the same, like you maybe start your business, I start my business or whatever, but like to know we're working on the wall, on the same part of the wall. Use that Ezra Nehemiah metaphor of like, we're rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and we're working on our little corner of the wall, and you're doing your part and you're holding your shovel and you're holding your sword, and we're doing it. And then celebrating it when God blesses it, right? Like, look what's happened. Look what's happened. Those things really matter in terms of like building a sense of status among your people, right? Like where it's like, we hold these things up as like really good and valuable, and you should look at, you should go do that. You should, be like this, be like this. There's a lot to be said for that kind of like celebration. And that includes, we're really good at it when it comes to like missionaries. Oftentimes, like they come home on furlough and we're like, this is great. And we should, and don't stop doing that. Again, the problem's not what's present. It's like, but do you celebrate other things? Like, are you like, man, this guy started a business and he's employing like 15 people, 10 of whom are from our church. And like, this is enabling like a core, people are able to provide for their families, be part of this community because that guy has a great business. You should want to be like that guy. Like that's the sort of thing where you're like, because that's amazing. Like I've said for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, one of the most loving things that Christians are going to be able to do for each other in this era is like start a business where people can provide for their families and not have to lie all the time. Like in the community we have here, it's like, that's an amazing blessing. That's just kind of like in the water, is like, man, people can get jobs and they can just provide for their families and be faithful members of the community and evangelize their neighbors, do all the stuff. But they're not always having to worry about, well, if I say the wrong thing, then corporate's going to do this, or corporate's going to do that, or, I get fired. And it's like, what a blessing to just relieve that. Right. Well, love your neighbor, start that business, do that thing. So those would be at least some ways to like encourage the corporate element.
So good. On this call, you have about, representing about 500 18 to 22-year-olds. And then we recorded it. So the rest of our pastors, which is probably another 500. And so your words are going to have some significant impact on about 1,000 college students. And so just thank you for your time. Just thank you for being able to share with us. I think that you have a unique perspective, and it's really been a blessing to us. So, man, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate what you guys are doing. Keith, it's been great to get to know you. And if I can be helpful in any way, I don't know. Like, so, I assume all of you guys are kind of Pacific Northwest, basically.
Yeah.
So
basically
Montana,
Colorado, California, all the way down there. So Nevada, all over the place. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. If I can be helpful in other ways, guys, feel free to reach out. Happy to, One of the blessings I think of our community is like, I feel this a lot, like, the team that we've assembled means that we can be available in things like this to try to like help. Like we feel like we have a really healthy community. It's been around for 50 years. God's really blessed it, and so we want to be able to like export whatever can be exported that would be helpful to you guys. So very, very eager and happy to do that kind of stuff. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe.
Yeah,
appreciate you.
Yeah, see you guys.
All right.